What if the largest wealth transfer in human history was never meant for you? What if the number everyone keeps repeating, trillions moving from one generation to the next, isn't a gift, but a disguise? Because right now, millions of people believe they're standing at the edge of an inheritance that will change their lives. They're counting on it, planning around it, waiting for it, and almost all of them are wrong. Not because the money doesn't exist, but because it was never going to move the way they think. This isn't a story about wealth changing hands. It's a story about wealth compressing, about a system so old, so precise, so mathematically consistent that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Empires have fallen inside this pattern. Middle classes have vanished inside it. Entire generations have been convinced they were beneficiaries, only to discover they were the fuel. And the most unsettling part, this process doesn't need corruption. It doesn't need conspiracy. It doesn't even need intent. It runs on arithmetic. It has played out the same way for over 2,000 years, from ancient empires to modern financial systems. And it is reaching another critical phase right now. You are not watching history unfold. You are watching a machine complete a cycle. Welcome to Fiscal Flare. Every era tells itself the same story, that this time is different, that the rules have changed, that technology, innovation, and modern institutions have finally broken history's old limits. But history doesn't break. It repeats patterns. And one of those patterns is so consistent, so brutally reliable, that it has reshaped civilizations without armies, without invasions, without revolutions. It happens quietly. Through currency, through policy, through time. It begins with trust. A society anchors its money to something real, something scarce, something finite. And that trust fuels growth, trade, stability, and the illusion of permanence. Then pressure builds, wars grow expensive, governments expand, our promises multiply faster than productivity. And eventually, leaders choose the path every strained system chooses. They dilute the money. At first, slowly, almost invisibly, always with reassurances that nothing fundamental has changed, but something always has. Because currency is not just a medium of exchange, it is a contract across time. And when that contract is altered, the consequences do not fall evenly. They never have. Those closest to the source of money creation adapt. They shift into assets. They consolidate. Those who trust the currency, the savers, the wage earners, the families planning for the future, absorb the loss. Not all at once, but relentlessly. This is how wealth stops circulating and starts concentrating, not through theft, not through collapse, but through mathematics applied over decades. Rome learned this lesson the hard way. So did modern Europe. So did every society that believed stability would protect them from arithmetic. And now, once again, we are told we are standing at the edge of a historic inheritance, a once-in-a-lifetime transfer of wealth. But before you accept that story, you need to understand the mechanism behind it. Because what history shows, with disturbing clarity, is that when this pattern reaches its final phase, most people don't inherit wealth. They finance someone else's consolidation. And, to see where this is heading, we have to trace the pattern itself, step by step, across centuries. Every consolidation begins the same way, not with collapse, not with panic, but with confidence. A society establishes a form of money that people trust because it is anchored to something real. Gold, silver, land, scarcity. This trust unlocks expansion, trade accelerates, cities grow. Savings accumulate. A middle class emerges. Not overnight, but steadily, generation by generation. And with that growth comes belief. Belief that the system is stable. Belief that effort will be rewarded. Belief that storing value today will protect tomorrow. This is the foundation stage, the only phase in which broad prosperity is possible. But it carries a flaw hidden inside its success. The more stable the currency becomes, the more confidently governments borrow against it. Wars feel affordable. Social programs feel manageable. Debt feels temporary. And slowly, the anchor begins to loosen. At first, the change is microscopic, almost academic. A reduction here, an expansion there, a promise that the adjustment is temporary, necessary, responsible. The public barely notices. After all, the numbers still look the same. The coins still circulate. The paper still buys. But value doesn't disappear loudly. It erodes quietly, and erosion never announces itself until the structure starts to give way. This is where the illusion hardens. People mistake continuity for permanence. They assume what worked for their parents will work for them. They believe saving inside the system is the same as being protected by it. History shows otherwise. Because once a currency's anchor is compromised, the outcome is no longer political. It becomes mathematical, and mathematics does not negotiate. This is the moment where consolidation becomes inevitable, not because of malice, but because the structure has already been altered. What follows is not chaos, it is sequence, and once the sequence begins, it unfolds with mechanical precision. The second stage is where the damage becomes irreversible, even though almost no one recognizes it at the time. This is the phase of expansion without restraint. The currency still functions, markets still operate, paychecks still arrive. But beneath the surface, the rules have changed. Money begins to multiply faster than value. Debt grows faster than production. Promises outpace reality. Governments don't announce this shift as debasement. They call it flexibility, stability, necessity. Printing isn't framed as dilution, it's framed as support. Support for growth. Support for employment. Support for national strength. And for a while, it works. Asset prices rise, stock markets surge, real estate inflates. On paper, society looks richer than ever. But this is where the quiet transfer begins. Because inflation does not punish everyone equally, those who hold assets, land, equities, businesses, watch their net worth expand alongside the money supply. Those who hold currency, wages, savings, fixed income, watch their purchasing power thin out year after year, not dramatically, not suddenly, but permanently. This is the critical misunderstanding. Most people think inflation is a temporary inconvenience. History shows it is a sorting mechanism. It separates those closest to the source of money creation from those farthest away. It rewards leverage. It penalizes patience. And once this mechanism is active, wealth no longer circulates. It climbs, upward, gradually, relentlessly. By the time the public feels the pressure, higher housing costs, shrinking savings, a sense that effort no longer leads to security, the consolidation is already well underway. This is why this stage is so dangerous. It feels normal, nothing breaks, nothing crashes. The system continues, just tilted, and a tilted system doesn't announce collapse. It redistributes power until the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. The third stage is where the system loses subtlety. The imbalance that once felt abstract becomes personal. Prices rise faster than wages. Savings no longer feel like protection. Entire generations realize they are running in place, while standing still becomes impossible. This is the phase historians mislabel as crisis, but it isn't a sudden failure. It's the delayed consequence of everything that came before. By now, currency no longer functions as a reliable store of value. It still moves, it still trades, but it no longer preserves time. And that distinction matters more than people realize. Because when money stops holding value across years, planning collapses. Long-term thinking disappears. Stability turns speculative. The middle class, built on saving, patience, and delayed reward, begins to erode. This is not because people become irresponsible. It's because the system makes responsibility expensive. Those who keep wealth in currency lose silently. Those who convert it into assets survive and then dominate. Ownership consolidates. Land concentrates. Equity concentrates. Influence concentrates. And the closer you are to money creation, the less damage you experience. This is the stage where people start asking the wrong questions. They blame greed. They blame corporations. They blame policy decisions made yesterday. But history shows that by this point, individual decisions barely matter. The structure is already doing the work. Every past civilization that reached this stage experienced the same outcome: a hollowed middle class, a protected elite, and a growing sense that the system no longer rewards effort, only positioning. This is the moment when trust fractures. Not trust in leaders, trust in the future. And once that breaks, the final stage is no longer optional. It becomes unavoidable. The final stage is often described as a reset. That word makes it sound clean, neutral, even hopeful. It isn't. Resets don't redistribute wealth. They lock it in. By the time a system reaches this phase, the transfer has already happened. Ownership has already concentrated. Power has already shifted. The reset merely formalizes what mathematics has decided. A new framework is introduced, a new currency, a new rulebook, sometimes a new promise of stability, and on the surface it looks like a fresh start. But beneath it lies a simple truth. Only those who reached this point, holding real assets, enter the new system intact. Everyone else starts over. This is why resets feel sudden to the public and predictable to those who study history. Rome didn't fall when its currency collapsed. It fell after the consolidation was complete. Weimar Germany didn't lose wealth during hyperinflation. It lost it before the reset restored order. The damage always precedes the cure. And the people who suffer most are not the reckless or the uninformed. They are the ones who trusted the system to behave tomorrow the way it behaved yesterday. This is the most uncomfortable lesson of all. Stability is never permanent. Only patterns are. And patterns do not require permission to repeat. They only require time. History doesn't argue with theory. It tests it. And when you lay this pattern across time, the results are disturbingly consistent. Take Rome. For centuries, the Roman currency was trusted, silver coins with real weight, real scarcity, real value. Trade flourished. Savings mattered. A middle class existed because money held meaning across generations. Then the pressures arrived. Expansion. Standing armies. Imperial overreach. To fund it all, Rome did what strained states always do. It reduced the silver content of its coins, not all at once, not openly, but gradually. Each debasement felt manageable. Each adjustment was framed as temporary. But over time, the denarius became a shadow of itself. Less silver, more alloy, less trust, more circulation. Prices didn't rise because merchants became greedy. They rose because the currency was dissolving. And as inflation accelerated, the damage followed a familiar path. Small landholders lost everything. Salaried workers collapsed under rising costs. Savings evaporated. Those who held land, gold, and political proximity survived. They consolidated. They expanded. By the time Rome attempted reform, wealth had already concentrated into the hands of a few. The middle class, once the backbone of the empire, had been erased. The pattern held, not because Rome was corrupt, but because Rome obeyed arithmetic. This is what makes the lesson uncomfortable. You don't need incompetence. You don't need malice. You don't need conspiracy. You only need sustained debasement and enough time. And Rome had both. Fast forward nearly 2,000 years. Different language, different technology, same mathematics. In early 20th century Germany, the conditions were familiar. A nation burdened by obligations it could not meet, operating under a monetary system it could no longer sustain. To solve the problem, policymakers reached for the same tool Rome had used: currency expansion. At first it looked manageable. Money flowed, bills were paid, confidence held. Then the acceleration began. Prices detached from reality, wages lagged behind survival. Savings, accumulated over lifetimes, vanished in months. The collapse didn't arrive as a single explosion. It arrived as disbelief. People carried wheelbarrows of cash that couldn't buy bread. Pensions became meaningless. The middle class dissolved in real time. And once again, the outcome followed the same structure. Those holding currency were destroyed. Those holding assets survived. Those with land, foreign reserves, or political proximity consolidated power. When stability was restored, it didn't restore fairness, it locked in the damage. The new system didn't redistribute wealth. It preserved the positions that inflation had already created. Germany didn't lose its middle class during reform. It lost it before reform made sense. This is the critical misunderstanding. Hyperinflation isn't the transfer, it's the confirmation. By the time prices explode, ownership has already shifted, and the reset only makes the shift permanent. The pattern didn't care that Germany was modern. It didn't care that it had engineers, scientists, or industry. It only cared about arithmetic, and arithmetic was undefeated. The most dangerous moment in any cycle is when a system convinces itself that it has escaped history. In the mid-20th century, the world believed it had done exactly that. After global war and economic collapse, a new monetary order was constructed, carefully designed, tightly anchored, and internationally coordinated. Currencies were fixed. The dollar was tied to gold. And trust was restored. For a generation, it worked. Growth returned. Savings mattered again. The middle class expanded across continents. Productivity translated into stability. But stability creates confidence. And confidence invites excess. As decades passed, obligations multiplied. Wars were fought far from home. Social promises expanded. Deficits became structural. And slowly, quietly, the anchor began to strain. Foreign governments noticed first. They demanded conversion. They asked for metal instead of paper. And when the arithmetic no longer worked, the decision was made. The anchor was removed. Not with panic, not with collapse, but with a televised announcement that permanently altered the rules of value. From that moment forward, money was no longer constrained by scarcity. It was constrained only by policy. The consequences didn't arrive overnight. They arrived as decades. Asset prices climbed, wages stalled. Debt replaced income as the engine of growth. Those who owned appreciated. Those who saved fell behind. Once again, the pattern held, not because leaders were malicious, but because the structure had changed. And once a currency becomes unlimited, wealth behaves differently. It stops spreading. It starts concentrating. This brings us to now. To the moment everyone is told they are standing at the edge of the greatest wealth transfer in history. Trillions changing hands. Generations enriched. A once-in-a-lifetime inheritance. That's the story being sold. But history teaches us to look past the headline and examine the structure underneath. Because when wealth truly transfers broadly, it shows up as opportunity, as mobility, as rising ownership. What we see instead is concentration. A financial system where total wealth reaches record highs while ownership narrows, where asset prices soar beyond reach and savings struggle to keep pace with time itself. The numbers tell a different story than the narrative. Most of the wealth expected to transfer already sits at the top. And when it moves, it doesn't cascade downward. It circulates inward. Families with assets pass on assets. Families without them inherit expectations. The middle absorbs inflation. The top absorbs appreciation. This is not a malfunction. It is the designed outcome of a system that has been expanding its currency base for decades. And this is where the pattern becomes unavoidable. Because once wealth is concentrated in assets, and assets inflate faster than income, the ladder out disappears, not suddenly, not dramatically, but permanently. This is the phase where people feel something is wrong, but can't quite name it. They work harder, they save longer, they delay milestones, and still the distance grows. History tells us what comes next, not because we want it to, but because it always does. The cycle doesn't end with fairness. It ends with formalization. A reset that doesn't undo consolidation, it confirms it. And by the time it arrives, the outcome is no longer up for debate. At this stage in the cycle, the most common response is denial. People insist the rules have changed, that innovation will save them, that this system is smarter, more resilient, more advanced than anything that came before it. History has heard this argument before. Rome believed its roads, laws, and engineering made it immune. Weimar Germany believed industrial power would carry it through. Every modern system believes technology breaks the old equations, but the pattern has never cared about belief. It only responds to mathematics. When currency expands faster than productivity, savings lose meaning. When assets inflate faster than wages, ownership concentrates. When ownership concentrates long enough, mobility disappears. At that point, the system no longer needs collapse to complete the transfer. It finishes quietly. Through inheritance structures that recycle assets upward, through housing markets that lock out new entrants, through capital markets that reward scale over participation, the majority doesn't lose wealth in a single event. They lose it in opportunity they never access. This is why the final stage feels invisible until it's complete. Nothing breaks. Nothing explodes. Life just becomes narrower. Choices shrink. Risks rise. Security recedes into the distance. And by the time the word reset enters public conversation, the reset itself has already happened, not as a correction, but as a confirmation. The system does not reset to balance. It resets to preserve whatever structure exists at the moment of transition. History does not wipe the slate clean. It seals it. And this is the moment most people miss. By the time a society openly discusses inequality as a crisis, inequality has already hardened into architecture. From here on, outcomes are no longer debated. They are enforced by structure. Asperse tu. What history makes painfully clear is that wealth is rarely stolen. It is repositioned, not through chaos, not through collapse, but through systems that reward proximity to assets and punish trust in currency. Every civilization that believed this time would be different, learned the same lesson in the same way. Not all losses are dramatic. Some are structural. Rome didn't wake up one day impoverished. Weimar families didn't lose everything overnight. Modern societies don't collapse when the headlines say they will. They decline when opportunity silently narrows and ownership quietly hardens. The greatest trick of this cycle is that it never announces itself as a threat. It presents itself as progress, as growth, as inevitability. And by the time the language changes from expansion to correction, from growth to reset, the outcome is already locked in. This is why the so-called wealth transfer feels different from what people expect. Because it isn't a gift. It's a filter. It doesn't ask who worked hardest. It doesn't care who planned best. It simply rewards whoever was positioned correctly when the structure shifted. History doesn't judge intentions. It enforces mechanics. And the mechanism at work today is the same one that has operated for thousands of years. Currency expands. Assets absorb the expansion. Ownership concentrates. Mobility fades, not because of conspiracy, but because of arithmetic. The uncomfortable truth is this: most people don't lose wealth because they make bad decisions. They lose it because they trust systems that no longer preserve value. The cycle doesn't end with destruction. It ends with normalization. A world where the new distribution of wealth feels permanent, inevitable, and out of reach. And once that feeling settles in, history moves on until the next cycle begins. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe.